I'm going to start a new video series. My prior one, you may or may not have seen, was AppGyver, no-code user interface platform using Xano as a no-code backend to create a to-do list mobile app in its entirety. There may be some cleanup on that one that I need to go back and do, but this one is still going to use Xano. So the no-code backend will be the same, but we're going to use it in a completely different capacity. In this series of videos, we're going to be attaching into Webflow. And what you see here in front of you right now is my attempt to kind of get myself lined up on what we're going to do. And I'll go through that here in a moment. But our goal is Webflow as a no-code front end, going against Xano as the integration layer for a no-code backend. So very similar to maybe what you might be familiar with if you're a Webflow person with Zapier and some of those other tools. But I think we might be able to demonstrate a little bit more capability and flexibility if Xano is a tool that is of interest to you. So let's do a little bit of interview overview and kind of move from there. Building a content delivery system in the overview. This system will get up-to-date topical articles from Newscatcher, which I'll describe momentarily, and store them in Xano to be delivered on a scheduled basis to a Webflow site. The system will allow the administrator to pick the topics to be used in getting articles. So all that to say that I went out and found out in rapidapi.com a nice Newscatcher news aggregator API that has a freemium model. So it's free unless you need to go over a certain number of calls per day or articles per call. We are going to use the free version of everything. And just as kind of a note, what you're going to need to do for some initial to-dos to prepare for this video series, create a free Webflow account. I already have my free Webflow account, and when I come into my all projects, I have it empty here waiting for me to create a new project, which we'll do together. I'm not real good at Webflow, so anybody out there who's really good at it as we go through this series, feel free to throw comments in the videos to let me know what I could do differently. Create a Rapid API account. So if we come up here and look at this tab, Rapid API, I'll go ahead and go back to the main page-ish, out to the marketplace at least. So in the marketplace, go ahead and do a sign up. I'm already signed up for Rapid API. So sign up for that account, that's free as well. And then we're gonna do a search for Newscatcher. So let me switch back over to Rapid API. And the API I found that was free, which was a key piece, and had good functionality, was Newscatcher. And I thought we could do something pretty fun with that one. So that's where we're gonna run with this video series, not unlike the overview. So the goal here is to be able to call and get a list of recent topical news articles. And we'll get into a little bit more detail of how Newscatcher works as we call into its APIs. And then you'll need to sign up for a free Xano account if you don't already have one. If you're so inclined, you can use the my referral link, which is xano.io/Steve101. That'll give you a 10% savings if you do get to the point where you want a paid account. But everything we're going to do here in this video series is going to be free accounts for everything. There are some things in Xano I may show you with background tasks you can set up that would be a paid account, but I will do my best to make sure and call those out so that you're not misled on what you can do with free. But I think you're going to be surprised with the amount of capability across all of these free tools that you get. Okay, so let's do a quick run through on the picture that I have here. Xano is the big box at the bottom. Xano is going to be a combination of database tables and APIs, the back end in essence. Newscatcher, we're going to probably use a couple of the APIs, but I have the search represented here most obviously because that's the one that'll bring back the topical articles. And so if you look at the orange colored circles, If we call get articles, we are going to, at some point, remember this is kind of an endpoint view. So all of this stuff on this page will take time to get through. And we're going to start at a basic level and just build up toward this level of complexity. But in the perfect world, when we get through the series, you'll retrieve the topic that you want to search on, like right here is all the topics that they say they support, sports or news or tech or world or finance, and you'll apply that to the search. And then that will, let's say, get the topic, find all the articles based on that topic, and then put all the article return information into a table in the database in Xano. And then what we'll do is we will integrate with Webflow and we'll create a publish API that will post the articles into Webflow, into a collection. So we'll create a bunch of items in a collection in Webflow that are then displayed on the screen like blog articles. And then, in perfect world, we'll also set those as published so that when we publish them again, we don't duplicate articles. We'll only push to Webflow from the Xano table articles that have not already been published. And then the fun thing that I want to get to, so you guys are going to have to keep me moving, is the ability for someone in Webflow to click on a subscribe button, which will fire off what's called a webhook, which is a trigger event that will record information in Xano about people who are interested in a certain topic of articles, which you then, instead of publishing just to Webflow, you will be able to use the marketplace capabilities of Xano to send newsletter emails to those people who have subscribed with a few articles listed in them. So that's a whole bunch of stuff, and you'll be surprised how many videos this could potentially take. My to-do list, as simple as that seemed, is up to 19 videos. So I will keep it as interesting as I can at each step so that you always get something accomplished. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to assume that while you were bored listening to me on giving the overview of what we're going to do, that you went and set up your Webflow account, your rapidapi account, that you subscribed to the free Newscatcher as well, so that you've got that API available, and that you're signed up for Xano. And so now I'm going to take us over to Newscatcher. I'm going to assume that you have the test endpoint blue button. If you haven't subscribed to Newscatcher yet, and remember it's free, so don't put in any credit card or pay any money, you'll see some subscription button here instead of test endpoint if you need to subscribe to it still. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the search does. Over here on the left in rapidapi for Newscatcher are the endpoints or the APIs they allow you to use. We're going to try search. And if you notice, as I click across these on the right side of the screen, their code snippets are changing because what they're doing is setting up a way to do testing for you. So you can see this work before you actually know code against it. Okay, so search. They'll fill in your API key for you, which will happen when you subscribe. The host is set up for you by default. It looks like either they default this or I put this in there, but a search string for the type of articles required. So it limits the search. The language, you'll see me defaulting to English. And then they give you a sort by option. The most relevant results first, so relevancy is defaulted. And then optional from which point in time to start the search. We're going to leave that blank. We don't want to be overly complicated. We're going to skip past these. We're going to go to topic. And let's pick tech. And if you notice over here, it's filling in the query. So there's my Elon Musk English relevancy. There's tech that I just put in. We're going to get page 1 of the results back. And I think that's all we're going to fill in. You can get fancy with a bunch of sources and ranking and all other kinds of fun stuff. But let's go ahead and just test the endpoint. And you'll see now that we've got results back. So these are the results that we're going to get back for Xano when we call into this API. And our most interesting part here is we want to look at the articles. So if I look at the full, let me see what we got here. There we go. So this would be fully collapsed. I'm going to open it up. Status is okay. Total hits is 280. This is the first page. Total of 56 pages. There were 5 articles per page. So if I wanted to get all 280, I would have to loop through 56 API calls at 5 per page to get the list of articles. This is user input, which I'm not interested in at the moment. And here's an example of articles, and it's going to be a list of articles. This is the detail you get back for an article. So you get the summary, the author, the link to the article, which are probably the 3 things that are of most interest to us. The media would be the image they use for the header article. We'll probably add that in. The title is going to be interesting to us. And that's probably most of it. Maybe the published date. And then you'll see that we've got 5 other articles that have come back, all being different, that we're going to pull in. So this is what we're getting from Newscatcher. We're not going to mess with Webflow for the moment. I think the first thing we're going to do is Xano into Newscatcher and show that we can quickly pull back some API or some article data. So let me come over to Xano. I know it feels like a lot of setup all of a sudden. I'm like many minutes into this and feeling like we haven't really got to do anything yet, but we're getting there real quick. Okay, so when you come into Xano, you will probably have an empty initial instance screen. I've got a whole bunch of little projects that I've tried and done, and this one is going to be Webflow. So you'll want to create a workspace called, well, call it whatever you want. I called mine Webflow because that's the UI front end we're testing against or building against. And so what you're going to see on the left when you have your Webflow workspace is that you have a dashboard, which we're on right now. You have a database, which when you set up your workspace, you have the option of allowing login via email, which is the one you want to pick. We're not going to do anything with login for the moment, so it won't matter, but they default set up a user table for you, which is great. And we're going to add some tables. And then I click on API, and you can see that I can set up a bunch of APIs. So I'm going to go view those so you can see what those are. And by default, they set up all my user tables, so I can get access into my user information. For this, we won't use any of those. And then a library, which we probably will be using. It allows me to set up functions that I can then use in my APIs. So let's just go ahead and start building some stuff. Since we're going to call into Newscatcher, I want to be able to store the articles, and I'm going to keep it simple initially. News article. So I'm going to create a table called news underscore article. At the moment, I don't want them to default create the API points for edit, delete, and list. We're just going to build these one at a time as we do things. And so as soon as I hit add table, you will now see we have a news article table. And what we need to be able to store as a starting point. So take just a second here, depending on your experience with Xano. We're in the table now, so we'll be able to see all of the information. If I go back one, you'll see now instead of just user, I also have news article, which is the one we just created. And so these are the columns, and I want an article column, and I want this to be of a JSON type. So this will mimic the structure, JSON, raw JSON with any structure. I'm using that one, pardon me. I'm using this JSON at the bottom instead of this object definition up at the top. They're similar, but this one wants you to define specific sub-elements. And I just want to be able to put a JSON blob of information from the API in. So we're going to call this article. and we're going to save it. And I'm always a fan of having my created at the end. You don't have to, but you've got the ability to drag and drop that column wherever you want it. And so now we have an article column that we are going to put the JSON in, the stuff that was returned for each article. Okay. So now I've got a place to store my articles. Now I need to create a function that actually calls the Newscatcher API. Now you could write that directly in your API, but I'm trying to get better in my videos about doing things in kind of best practices fashion. And the best way to do it is to create a function that is then referenced in the API. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function that I call getArticles. And we'll put a little documentation in there because that's a best practice. Articles from Newscatcher API and Rapid API. And Newscatcher is 1T. Okay. Actually, when you see me correcting spelling and stuff like that, that is Grammarly that I happen to have set up. I should probably turn that off at some point because that is a little bit misleading. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and turn all that off. There we go. So there we go. You can ignore my Grammarly stuff. I've got horrible efforts with grammar and punctuation, so I use that for things I write. Okay. So I have a get articles, and I'm going to do no input for this. If I was doing an API from a user interface, you would have input, user ID and password, name, description, things like that, to then feed into the business logic and the function stack. But for now, we're going to use this one just to get data. So before I get data, we're going to come back over to Newscatcher. And let me come up to the top here. I'm going to click off of and back on to search. Here we go. So Xano has a really cool feature that we're going to start this off with because it makes life much easier. So I'm going to switch from a Node.js. You'll notice that Rapid API gives me all kinds of options. And I'm going to come down to shell. I have to keep moving myself out of the way for my Zoom stuff. I'm going to come down to shell and pick curl. So this is what you would use if you were trying to call this API in a terminal window, which I'll show you. And so I'm going to copy the code, and I'm going to open a terminal window and paste it. And what you're going to see is when I hit enter, you'll see that I get all the API results back. It's not quite as pretty as what we saw in Rapid API, but the reason I'm doing that is I want to make sure it works outside of Rapid API. And then I am going to come over to the function stack in Xano, and I'm going to click on my little plus up there like I did, and I'm going to add an item, external API request. So this is one of the function stack capabilities. We've got database, data manipulation and looping, functions that we're writing, which you'll see ours show up in here for the get articles, some cool utility functions, the ability to upload images and attachments, but we just want to call an external API. So here's my setup for that. It would be confusing to start with and hard to get through if you had to set up all of these pieces yourself. But what Xano has done is allowed me to import the curl request that I just saw working. So there was import curl request. I click the button. I just paste in what I used in my terminal window, which is what I got out of Rapid API Newscatcher at no effort, and I import. And so what you're going to see now is the Xano structure has put in the whole URL. It told me it's a get method, which is true. That's what the curl told us. It has no JSON parameters set up, but it does have the header information I need to successfully call the API. Let's see what we have here. And then it has all of my query parameters. So here's my search that I'm doing. And then you'll see there's my Elon Musk, my English, sort by relevancy, page one, and media true, which means give me the image link as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if I have done everything correctly, you know what, I like to clean this up a little bit, best practices. Always go to the output tab and give it a relevant name. They're nice enough to default it so you have something, but this is article list. Makes it a little easier to understand. And then come down to the response where they default to API 1, and we are going to pick the variable that we just created called article list, and we're going to save that. So now the run and debug. I have the ability by clicking on run and debug. I've got no inputs that I have to put in, and I'm going to hit run. And if all goes well, you'll see that I have results back. So these are the API results from Newscatcher. And you can copy as JSON and move it over to other areas if you want to look at it in a bigger editor. But this is the request I sent. So here's request. The method is get, and here's what it looked like. We've already seen that, so I'm going to collapse that. More interestingly, is here's my response. Now the headers I'm not really interested in unless I had an error. And then oftentimes if it's a good API, it'll give you a good idea what the error is and why. So I'm going to collapse the header because we had success, which we can see here. An HTTP return code of 200 means it worked. Now here's the more interesting stuff. So I'm in response, result, everything is good, and I have a list of articles. Page size 5 like we saw, and if I look at these articles, I have a list of them, and if I scroll through, you kind of see this little JSON break here between each item. And I can scroll through and see I have all 5 of those. I can also click on debugger, and in the debugger, you'll roll down. Here's the external API request. Here is the return that I got back, and the response, and the result. So what I want to do now is I want to put all this information that I've already successfully gotten out of Newscatcher, I want to put it in our table. So let's go ahead and back out of that. So I now have an article list, so I'm going to do a loop. So into data manipulation, like I mentioned earlier, we can do loops. And I'm going to do a for each because I have a controlled set to loop through. And you know what? You're going to learn that I kind of remember to do things in the wrong order. I'm going to go ahead and save my loop for the moment. For me to be able to loop through this successfully, I need to extract the list of articles from that big list of request, response, and all that information. So let me go ahead and run. Here we go. I'm going to get rid of my loop because I want to run this again, because I want to show you the result that we got back, because this is going to be relevant. Result. Okay. So I'm going to need to create a variable where I pull out the response, result, articles. That will drive me down into having something that just contains the articles. So response, result, articles is what I'm looking for. So we're going to come back over here to the function stack. Close out of my debugger. We're going to come back to the function stack, and we are going to go to data manipulation and create a variable. Let's see, so this is Newscatcher. You're going to see me change some naming here in a bit too. So my article list, yeah, okay. My hesitation is I don't like my naming standards. We're going to clean this up right now before. This is Newscatcher response. because it's not just an article list, and that's going to conflict with the name I want to give it later, and we're going to clean it up now before it's more of a mess. So this is going to return a Newscatcher response. We're going to call that Newscatcher response for now, because otherwise it was looking at an invalid variable. Okay, so now we're ready. I have the output set up the way I want for Newscatcher response. I am now going to create a variable, data manipulation, create a variable, and you'll see why here, article list, which is going to then be a value of Newscatcher response, but more than that, since it's JSON, I can use dot notation, and I want to have response result articles. So this should get me just a list of articles to go into the article list. Okay. So I'm getting all the items back and then pulling them into the articles list. And if I run this, I should not get an error. And I did not get an error. And if I go into the debugger and I look at the create variable, you'll see that I have 5 items in there, which is exactly what we want, a list of the 5 items. So you can see that it's an array because of the bracket, and then the curly braces encompass or wrap each of the separate articles. Okay, just normal JSON structure there is all that is in a list. And so now that I've created the variable, the next thing I want to do is to do a loop. So data manipulation loop, we're doing the for each. I am going to use my article list as a variable. It defaults to item, which means as it loops through this, as the for loop goes through the article list, it's going to place each individual article JSON structure into a variable called item. You can rename that, but I always leave it as a default because I think it serves its purpose. So what I want to do is I want to take that whole item and I want to do a database request where I add a record into my news article table. So we've got that set up initially. I'm going to click on it because what I want to do is I want to get the item variable now, which is one individual article with all of its properties, and I'm going to place that into the article column we created. And then created at, it defaults to now, which means it'll give you a current timestamp. That's given to you by default there. And then news article. We'll get rid of the _1 as the output. And here you say the table structure. It'll give us an ID. We'll put the article in, and it'll create a created at timestamp for us. So I'm going to save that. So literally at this point, when I run this, we should end up with data in our table. So let's go just prove here that if we look, I'm going to refresh. When I'm working in 2 separate tabs, you'll find me refreshing because I want to make sure I haven't done something in one tab that's not represented in the other. So here we have an empty table. We are going to come back over here and run and debug. Run. And it shows we got successful results back, which we'd seen happening before. And if I come into the debugger, we'll see that it looks like everything's worked correctly because I did add record 5 times. And the way to prove that is to come over here and click on the refresh. And there we go. That's always fun. You'll hear me say this often, but it's the simple things that are cool. And if I double click on this row, you'll see they've got a nice JSON editor for that JSON column with the JSON data I just added. So I can come in and just like we saw in rapidapi, I can see all of the data for this article. Now, we don't necessarily care about all the data. Like I'd mentioned, we care about the link, and we'll try to use the media so that we get a nice image in Webflow, and we care about the title. We probably care about the author. We may end up getting fancy and listing the copyright results so we don't get in trouble there. and then the summary, which is like an excerpt, and the publish date. Those will be the ones that we use most often, and the rest we'll ignore. If we decide to get fancy, we can also create an individual column in this table for title, summary, media, author. But at the moment, that seems a little too restrictive because we're not really sure what we want to do. And in the fashion of Agile, or at least this pseudo little form of Agile we're doing, we can easily get to the content that's in this JSON structure. So we're going to leave it that way for now. So what we've done at this point, if I go back over here, is we've actually got a call into here and we're populating the article table. And you'll notice my diagram is going to be off from the beginning. That's the way they'll always be when you plan these out. You kind of go with it, and the reality is whatever you're no coding is the right way because it's working. So what we have at this time is a very strong starting point to calling in and creating this little CMS management system. I'm going to go ahead and call this the first video. Next time, I think what we're going to do is maybe do a little bit more depth, and we're going to do one of two things. We're going to do a little more depth and maybe set up the topic capability for the API we already have, or we're going to go into Webflow and start messing around with how we get data into a collection. So I'm going to pick one of those two items depending on what makes the most sense, and we will do that in the next video. Thanks for your time.